page 29. But as you're looking for that, we'll just watch this little video clip. It's only about a minute or two.
Hours a day.
6 days a week.
Whenever I'm needed.
Every Saturday morning.
I spend my time
in a place that matters to God.
With people that matter to God.
My Frontline.
In the stresses,
successes,
problem solving,
tantrum resolving,
laughter,
teamwork,
jokes,
tears,
boredom,
tension,
cups of coffee,
cans of Coke.
God is working with me.
He helps me see what He sees.
Put here by God.
He knows the day ahead.
This place is rich with possibilities.
This is my Frontline.
So Genesis chapter 28 and beginning at verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and started towards Haran. At sunset he came to a certain place and he camped there. He lay down to sleep, resting his head on a stone. He dreamt that he saw a stairway reaching from earth to heaven, with angels going up and coming down on it. And there was the Lord standing beside him. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac, he said. I will give to you and to your descendants this land on which you are lying. They will be as numerous as the specks of dust on the earth. They will extend their territory in all directions. And through you and your descendants, I will bless all the nations. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done all that I have promised to you. Jacob woke up and he said, the Lord is here. He is in this place. And I didn't know it. He was afraid and said, what a terrifying place this is. It must be the house of God. It must be the gate of heaven. And Jacob got up early next morning. He took the stone that was under his head and set it up as a memorial. He poured oil on it to dedicate it to God. He named the place Bethel. The town there was once known as Luz. Then Jacob made a vow to the Lord. If you will be with me, and if you will protect me on the journey I am making, and if you will give me food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home, then you will be my God. This memorial stone which I have set up will be the place where you are worshipped, and I will give you a tenth of everything that you give to me. I want to begin with 3 questions, if I may. First question is, where are you most likely to meet your mechanic? In a garage, yeah? Where are you most likely to meet a lawyer? In their office or in court. So where are you most likely to meet with God? Right, everywhere. Maybe that's because we already know that, and that's fixed in our brains. Maybe if we rewound 6 months and started to think again, perhaps some of us would say, here in church. And yes, of course, we would expect to meet with God here in church. Yes, of course, we would expect to God when we meet on Wednesdays to pray. Yes, of course, when we meet in small groups in one another's homes to worship, to pray, to share time together, to eat together, we expect that God will be present. But the great truth that Jacob understands here is that God is with him wherever he is. And hopefully we take away with us, right at the forefront of our minds, that in the week that lies ahead, God is with us wherever we are. Let's begin to look at this story of Jacob. You see, the Lord meets with Jacob as he is settling down to go to sleep, probably outdoors. This young man had started a long journey. Now, Jacob was a twin, but he and his brother had never really got on at all. But things had now gotten completely out of hand. First, Jacob had managed to get the birthright from his brother. And now, in sort of working with his mum, they'd managed to deceive his dad, so that his dad gave him the blessing that should have gone to his elder brother. And Esau is absolutely fuming. And I mean fuming. His words are, if I get my hands on that brother, I'm going to kill him. And Esau was deadly serious. So Jacob's mum decides it may be sensible to send Jacob away for a little while. And so she sends him off to stay with Uncle Laban, about 500 miles away. That ought to be safe enough. Now, it's possible as we begin our reading that this is the end of just day one. If it is, then it's a jolly long walk from Beersheba to Luz, which he renamed Bethel. And so no doubt he is extremely tired. But as night begins to fall and he settles to sleep, probably outside under the stars, maybe with the shelter of some trees, Jacob is at a very, very low point. He is probably concerned for his own safety. There may well have been wild animals around and he is trying to sleep outside. There may be bandits on the journey that lie ahead of him. And for his brother, well, who knows where his brother is? Maybe his brother has been following. And it's at this point that the Lord appears to Jacob. In this dream, he has this vision of a ladder that reaches from earth all the way up to heaven, and of angels that are going up and down the ladder. And the Lord is there. The most important thing in the whole of that picture is simply that Jacob should know and understand he is not alone. We picked something of that up in one of our songs, didn't we? Even if I run away, you still never let go. And what Jacob finds out and discovers is that what is a very ordinary place now becomes extraordinary because he suddenly learns and realizes the Lord is there. And wherever we are, the Lord meets with us. And that too is the story of many men and women as we read through the scriptures together. He meets with them where they are, in many ordinary places. You know the story of Hagar? She was the servant of Sarah and Abraham. Only Hagar is the one who becomes pregnant. So Sarah becomes jealous. Sarah treats Hagar very badly and in effect drives her out of the home. But where does Hagar go? Who does she turn to? She has to go, so she takes some steps. She begins to walk along the road, and she needs to take a rest. Needs a drink in the hot weather. But it's there as she is sat by the side of the road that the Lord appears to her. And the Lord speaks into her life. It's on a journey, not knowing where she's going to go, not knowing what the future is going to hold. But think of Gideon. Where is it the Lord meets with Gideon? He's hiding somewhere, trying to crush the hard shell of grain with the equipment that you usually use to crush some ripe grapes. So he's not got the right equipment to use to do the job. But the point is, he is at home. He's going about his everyday tasks. They need to eat. So somehow he's got to get the grain out of the hard shell. And so he's doing his best. And he's at home trying to prepare a meal that the Lord meets with him. Or think about Matthew. There he is one day sat at his little booth collecting taxes from the people as best he can, making his living from doing so. And just a normal, regular, everyday. The same kind of things are happening. People are coming and they're paying their taxes. People are coming and they're arguing about how much he wants. People are walking down the road and trying to avoid eye contact because they haven't paid yet. And into that situation, every day, workplace for Matthew, the Lord comes and enters into Matthew's life. It's in the everyday places, wherever we are, that the Lord meets with us. The Lord met with people at quite unexpected times too. Moments that they didn't expect it. You know, think of Gideon. There he is preparing this meal. He's trying to hide in case the Midianites come. And so it's a massive shock for him when an angel of the Lord suddenly appears and says, "Gideon, peace." And Gideon's like, well, there's no chance of peace around here. It's into that troubled times when he's afraid, disturbed, wondering when the Midianites are next going to turn up and bang on his door. The most unexpected moment that the Lord comes and says, "Gideon, peace." Or think of the woman at the well. John chapter 4, there she goes to collect water. Doesn't really expect to find anybody at the middle of the day. Certainly doesn't expect anyone to speak to her, not with the reputation that she had. And yet there it is, at that ordinary, everyday place, that the Lord Jesus meets with her and speaks with her and actually begins to transform her life. Because wherever we are, the Lord can meet with us. And what the Lord has done in the lives of men and women, we're told, are given as examples for us. Doesn't mean in exactly the same way, but see how many different ways and how many different places the Lord came and met with people and they understood that he was there. In all of the places where we are, in all of the everyday things that we have to do, the Lord is present. Because our everyday life matters to God. You pick that line from the video. We're there in a place that matters to God, with people who matter to God, and doing things that matter to God. And it's where I like the way that the message tries to expand and help us to think through Romans chapter 1, where the message says, take your everyday, your ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as your offering. That means that worship is what we do every day, as we offer to God every place where we go and every task that we have to do. It may be mundane. It may at times be boring. It may be repetitive day after day after day. But the point is, God is there. And God is interested. And God cares. And God has a plan for you. And one of the things that we did at Church Weekend was we asked the question, what goals do we have for those front lines wherever we are? And I'm going to share with you some of the answers. They will affect what we're going to be doing over the next months and maybe year or two together as a church. But the discussion hasn't closed. If you were not at Church Weekend and you have thoughts about the goals you have, then write them down and share them. But here are some of the things that we said. On our front lines, where we are day by day, we want to be different. We want to be different by displaying the character of Christ at all times. We want to be a good model of godly character. We want to make a difference so that others are attracted to our faith and to the Lord Jesus in whom we believe. We want to be available for people. We want to notice if someone is feeling very down or very quiet. And maybe just ask the question, are you okay? And be ready to give a few moments to listen. We don't want to get involved in gossip. We don't want to get involved in pointing the finger at and blaming others. Rather, we want to be an inspiration to those around us. Those are some of the goals that we said we have for the places where we are day by day. Whether that's at home, whether it's in the street, whether it's in the shop, whether it's in the gym, or whether it's in the place where we go to work, or the school gate where we take our children or we meet them. The key thing as we think about the week that lies ahead is that the Lord is with us. The Lord meets with us wherever we are. The second thing that Jacob discovers, I think, in these verses is that wherever we are, the Lord can speak into our lives. And we see that the promises that the Lord gave to Jacob matched the needs that Jacob had at that moment. Let us think for a moment of Jacob's situation. He was alone. He really was on his own. Second thing is, he is most likely somewhat afraid. Though if you had asked him about it, he'd have put a very brave face on it. He's on a journey and maybe isn't exactly sure how to get to Uncle Laban's. So if those are his particular situations, what is it that he needs to hear? He's on his own, so what does he need to hear the Lord say? I'm with you. I'm with you. Jacob, you're not on your own. And that's the promise that the Lord makes to him. Wherever you go, I'm going to be with you. David, of course, in that lovely psalm, picks up those very same thoughts. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to heaven, well, obviously you're there. But if I make my bed in the depths, you're there too. And if I rise on the wings of the dawn and I go very quickly, as fast as I can, to the far side of the sea, actually you're there before I arrive. Although that isn't quite exactly the words that David used. But Lord, you were there. There is no place that David would go and not find that the Lord was present. That's the promise to Jacob. But the second promise is, Jacob, I will keep you. This is a word that first of all means to take great care of something. It's the word that God used when he said to Adam to take care of the garden. It's the word used in Genesis 30 to talk about taking care of the sheep. It's to be very careful with something, to look after it very, very specially. But there is another thought to it as well, which is that of watching over something or someone in order to protect it. And so, for example, you have the watchman, whose task is not to sleep at night, but to stay awake. To sit on the city walls, but to look outwards so that they see if there is any danger coming. And the Lord is saying to Jacob, Jacob, I'm going to take special care of you. And I'm going to watch over you and protect you. And Jacob learns and understands that the Lord speaks into our lives wherever we are. But not only for Jacob, think of those people that we were talking about a moment or two ago. They too find that the Lord speaks promises and words into their lives that match the needs that they have. Do you know a little bit about Jethro? Jethro was Moses' father-in-law. And in the days after Moses had led the people out of Egypt and they began their journeys, Jethro arrives to see his daughter and his grandchildren. And what he does is, as he looks around, he sees that Moses is trying to do everything. Even the tiniest little problem between two people among the thousands of the Israelites that were there. And Moses is dealing with it. And Jethro says, Moses, you can't do that. You're going to burn out. Well, not quite what Jethro said, but that was the point. Moses, this is too much. You can't shoulder all of this. You need to be willing to delegate this. You need to be willing to share this with others. And allow others to share the burden with you. And it's through his father-in-law that God speaks wise words into Moses' life. Think again of Gideon. How appropriate were those words to him? Gideon, peace. Be encouraged. The situation was anything but encouraging. It was about as discouraging and difficult as it could get. And yet into that discouragement, into that very low point, the Lord speaks and says, Gideon, be encouraged. Mary at the tomb. She's gone to anoint the body of the Lord for the very last time, paying her final respects. And what fantastic news when she hears the words, actually, he's not here. But don't panic with that. It's not that anybody's taken him. He's risen. He's alive. That's why he's not here. Words that spoke such great hope and joy into Mary's sadness and her tears. We find it over and over again in the Scriptures that the Lord speaks into our lives, wherever we are. Whatever the circumstances at that point in time, the Lord speaks. And we too should find, we will find, that the Lord speaks into our lives in ways that match our needs. That's the promise in Hebrews 4. And as we come before the throne of grace, what we find is mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. Might literally call that being patterned according to our need. I watch the ladies sometimes on a Monday morning as they're doing their knitting, and they're following a pattern. Some of them are just learning, so they're following a fairly simple pattern. Others of them are very good knitters, and they're following quite a complicated pattern. But it's a pattern, and they follow it. And the promise of Hebrews 4 is that God's grace and mercy is patterned according to the need that we have. That means that whoever we are, and whatever it is that we have to do, and wherever it is we're going to be going, whether we're going about the daily tasks like Gideon or the woman at the well, whether we're traveling like Jacob or Hagar, whether we're facing challenges like David when a bear and a lion come and attack his flock, whether we're caring for our family and our grandchildren like Lois and Eunice and Jethro, whether we're like Matthew in our office and our workplace, wherever we are, today, tomorrow, this week, next week, in the whole of our lives, the Lord is there. The Lord is with us. And the Lord speaks into our lives. Words to strengthen faith. Words to encourage our hearts. Words to promise his care. Because for us, as for the men and women in the Scriptures, wherever we are, the Lord speaks into our lives. So, what do those two great lessons that Jacob learned, what do those two wonderful truths actually mean? The Lord meets with us and is there. The Lord speaks into our lives. What does all of that mean? Does it not mean that the Lord can transform every situation in which we are? Wherever we are, whatever the situation, the circumstances, the Lord can transform that. See, this is what Jacob experiences. He comes to recognize that the place where he was, lonely and uncomfortable and probably cold as it was, he begins to be aware of the presence of the Lord. He wakes up having had that great dream of the angels ascending and descending, of the Lord at the top of the ladder and being the one who provides everything that he's going to need. And he says, whoa, the Lord is here. Like we sang, the Lord is awesome in this place. This, he says, is the house of God. That's the meaning of Bethel. It means house of God. And the house is where we are at home. The house is where we belong. The house is where we spend time. And the Lord spends time with us, wherever we are. We'll say a bit more next week about an old monk called Brother Lawrence. You heard the story of Brother Lawrence? He said, you know what? We know the presence of the Lord as much when we're in the kitchen washing dishes as when we're in the chapel kneeling to pray. And as you think of the week that lies ahead of you, some of the things that may well face you, are you going to be like Jacob and realize the Lord is in this place? Wherever it is that you go, whatever it is that you need to do, discover that the Lord is in this place. And that means that the Lord can transform wherever we are. The second thing that Jacob says is not only this is the house of God. This is nice for me. This is lovely that the Lord is here and I know that. He says this is the gate of heaven. In other words, that place was a touching place between heaven and earth. Not just for Jacob and not just for us, but for others around us. And that's the message, isn't it, of the ladder. Angels are going up and down. They're being sent by God. The scripture says they are ministering spirits sent to help men and women of faith. And so it's a picture that God is there and that God cares and that God provides. What it actually says to us is that the resources of heaven are being made available to men and women of faith on earth. Now that's rather good news. We start to think that one through. But not just for us, but for those around us. It may indeed be the house of God that we enjoy the presence of God there in a way that others don't see. But it also is that gate of heaven, a touching place for God's grace to come and to transform situations wherever we are. And so I hope as we close this morning that you will think about where you are this week, or the many places you are, and can recognize it as the place of God's choosing. Your ordinary, everyday, walking around life, the place of God's choosing. The place where God wants you to be right now. Whether that be the home or the garden, the school gate or the office, the bus or the local shop, a cafe or a park. Wherever you're going to be this week, understand that to be by divine appointment. Now you may be thinking, well, hold on a second, it's just the same day after day. It's mind-numbingly boring. It's monotonous. We think of it as the daily grind. I was going to read something of Ed's story, but there isn't time. The story of Ed appears in a book called Imagine Church. And Ed is a young man who thinks that his life is being wasted in a dead-end job that he's actually overqualified for anyway. And so Ed has a dream. Ed wants to be a full-time worship leader. He wants to go and be trained at Hillsong. And then he will really serve the Lord. Now, thankfully, somebody got to come alongside Ed and to hear his story and to begin to perhaps use the story of Jacob to see that wherever we are can indeed be the place of God's choosing and God's appointing. The story of Ed continues some 6 to 9 months later. And Ed shares again his story, and he says, you know, after our conversation, he said, I began to think about the place where I was and the people that I was with. And he said, I began to go into work 10 minutes earlier than I used to. So I had a chance to say hello to people as they arrived. I'd sit and talk with other colleagues about the news and about our families and about the football and about whatever else it is. And suddenly they began to realize little by little that I was a Christian. At first they thought that was rather funny and rather quaint and rather odd. But then one day one of them said to me, Ed, can you pray with me? And now Ed was realizing that his ordinary, everyday life was in fact a place of God's choosing. So the outward circumstances were not at that point changed or transformed. But the transformation began within his heart and within his thoughts. Just as it does with Jacob. Jacob awakes and he realizes this is the house of God. And I didn't even know it. I didn't even see that. But now he does. And so he sets up that stone that he had put his head on and he anoints it with oil. And we might be thinking, what are you doing? What Jacob's actually doing is saying this place now is special. And what we need to do is set up that monument in our front lines and say these places are special. Because these are the places where God is. These are the places in which God can speak into our lives. And these are the places in which he can transform us and the lives of others around him. May we respond as Jacob did, giving ourselves, giving all that we have to him day by day, knowing that the Lord can transform every situation wherever we are. No time has gone.